Yesterday we were covering this new React hook that we were talking about called useState. You guys remember what that was for? Why we were using that? Out loud. I heard you saying something.
I was thinking just the status running in the background.
Okay, so let's talk again real quick about what state is, so that we're all on the same page. Then, does anyone have an idea of what we want to talk about when we're talking about state? What is that? A class component. Okay, so we can have state inside of a class component. That's true. But what is state though?
It's very similar to the session.
Is it? They're a collection of properties that can change over the lifespan.
That's pretty good. Yeah, or it could be over the lifetime of the application, right? We could have some state that was more global, something that could change while our application is running. All right, so
you can do local storage with things, right? Just like with session. Simple stuff.
Yeah, local storage could be another I guess, example of where we've got some state in our application, right? You could store some stuff there, maybe change it, access it, all of that kind of stuff. So the idea behind state is that this is some data in our application that could change, all right? Great. So let's look back at the code that we were writing yesterday and just review it. Oops, that's something else. All right, let's go into our components here, and I think we were working on random list, right? All right. Let's just go through this line by line real quick. Vincent, what's happening at the top?
We're importing React from React, obviously, and the useState is a function.
It is a function. Yes, exactly.
Sweet.
So, what's happening with these curly braces here? What's that?
Me?
Should look familiar from yesterday afternoon, right?
Mesa?
Yeah.
Oh, it's, I don't know, actually.
Starts with a D.
A D? Deconstruct.
We are destructuring right here.
Destruction.
Okay. So we're pulling out some specific thing that we're interested in from React, which is the useState function. All right, cool. Next line, Nick. Actually, line 3.
Yeah, importing the fancy paragraph, which is the
Something on the list of them. You're gonna what?
You can zoom in.
Do you need this bigger, Thurston? Sorry about that.
That's cool.
Was that too big? Sorry.
Yeah.
All right. There we go. All right, so Nick, what was going on here? Sorry.
Importing the fancy paragraph, which is the name of the function.
It is a function, yeah. So if we go into our fancy paragraph here, you'll see that we've established this function, and then down here we're exporting that as the default export. Good. All right, that's all we're doing. We're just importing this function. Good. Next, V. What's happening on line 5?
Line 5 is an arrow function for random list.
Good.
Items.
So let's pretend like we're JavaScript right now. Are we invoking this function right now?
No.
No. So we're really just establishing what is the definition of the function. And then what do we do next down on line 26?
26, we're exporting it as a component.
So that is our default export from this file. Good. All right. Let's say that we've invoked this function somewhere in our application. Now what happens? Man.
It's going to run. It's going to look at the items.
Okay.
It's going to set the items to a particular state.
Yeah, so let's be clear about what's going on. Here, we're invoking this useState function, and then we're passing it in an empty array. So that's basically saying, I want my initial state of this component to just have an empty array of items, okay? And then what are we getting back here? These should kind of look familiar from yesterday in the afternoon as well. What's going on the left side? I know you weren't here yesterday in the afternoon, Andy. So you guys who were here in the afternoon, what's happening here? On the left on line
you're
6.
taking the items and set items from the use state and adding that to your namespace.
So we're not taking it from the useState function, we're taking it from the result
Yeah.
of invoking the useState function, right? So the invoking this is, excuse me, giving us back an array that has 2 elements in it. And we've decided to give a name to those 2 elements like this. We're calling the first thing items, and then the second thing is going to be set items. And what's set items going to be?
Function to
A function. Okay? So that will allow us to update our state at some point later on. Alright, good. Let's keep going. Where are we? We are here at line 8, Jordan.
On line 8, you are creating a function called Untitled.
Okay.
And in that function, you're going to create a random number that's, I guess, between, because you are using mass.4, so that's going to be an integer. Then
Yeah.
mass.random times 99 will be a number between either 1 to 99 or 0 to 99. I'm not sure on that.
Should be 0 to 99 because we could potentially get back a 0 from that.
Then
Yeah.
0 to 99 integers.
Okay.
Then after that, in 13, you are setting the items.
Okay.
You want to you don't want to just set the array by itself because that array will not actually update the actual state and render the new number out. So you create a new array, basically adding everything that item type and append the random number into that new array.
Good. Yeah, exactly. So yesterday, one of the things that we experimented with is we tried to push to the original items array, and then we tried to just do set items, passing in items again, and remember that didn't work. So we were seeing, oh wait, this is not getting added to the list. So instead, what we did is we used the spread operator to take all the existing items, place them in this new array, and then we have our new random number put at the end. Very good. All right, next we are on line 16. It's over here.
Paul.
I just
Trying to
can't
hide.
tell the dark side. You had a question, though, Isaiah?
Yeah, for the spread operator, like
Okay.
when it actually spreads it, how does it maintain order? Or does it depend on what you're using, or rather what object you're using?
It would be just like if we use the slice function. So slice pretty much does the same thing as it takes all of the items as they are, but it gives us a shallow column. So that's basically what's happening there with that spread operator. Now, if we use the spread operator in the context of an object,
Yeah.
there really isn't.
Okay, so it really depends on what you're using.
Yeah, it depends on the context.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly. All right, Paul, go ahead.
So for it to display, so we're going to be calling, so we have our own little section that contains the button. So when you click the button, it's going to call back to the handle click function to generate a number.
So is this HTML? JSX. Looks kind of like HTML, but not entirely, right? Some differences here. All right, and then what's happening here on line 19? That's kind of interesting looking.
Adding the items to
So why did we use these curly braces here? because we're trying to insert some kind of a JavaScript expression, right? Here we're trying to say items.map, which means we want to go through and transform every one of those items in a specific way. And then my transformation function is actually giving back some JSX in this case, right? So I'm using this subcomponent that I've imported here, this fancy paragraph. I'm giving it a key, which is just telling React what is the unique value of this item. In this case, we use the index. And then inside that, I'm just placing the item by using those curly braces again. Right? So when I put things inside those curly braces, that means that I'm inserting some kind of JavaScript expression. All right, cool. Does everyone feel pretty good about this at this point? Any questions about the mapping? Does that look all right? It was. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, when we did for each map and filter. Exactly. All right. One other small thing I wanted to add to this. What if I wanted my this random list component to have some kind of a title above it? How would I go about doing that? Mm-hmm. So here's what we could do. If we go back into our app.js where we're actually creating this random list, what if I say title and we'll just call it this is my random list. Okay. Now, how would I actually, and I'll save that there, how would I actually output this in my random list? It's now going to be props.title, but wait a minute, whoa, I wasn't taking in any props. I need to change that, right? So I need to say, now I'm actually interested in this props object that I'm getting. And then up in here inside my div, I could just create an h2 tag. Oops. And then inside that h2 tag, props.title, right?
You just put the title of it.
I'm sorry, say that one more time.
You just put the title there for the word, right?
Well, then I'm hard coding. If I'm hard coding here, that means that my component's not as flexible.
Yeah.
I want my component to be flexible so that if I use it in different parts of my application, maybe I want to give it a different title here than I do over here, right? That gives me that flexibility and that reusability. Okay. So now that I'm doing this, let's go and see if that's showing up on our page. Got it. Oops. I don't think I was actually running it at all. So that was part of the issue. Okay. 3,000. Okay, so here it is, and I've got my. This is exciting, right? Here I've got my title that I wanted to have, right? What if we wanted to use destructure? You guys want to try that? So that we don't have to say props.title? Maybe clean up our code a little bit. So if I know that I'm taking in this props object, I can just pull out some specific thing that I'm interested in. So I'm interested in the title. That's the only thing I know I'm getting, and then I could just remove this props right there. Okay? Go back here, nothing's changed at all, right? What if I left that props.title there? What would happen now? Yeah, what if I save this as is?
Tell you props is undefined.
Yeah, not only will it tell me that, but that's going to throw an error, right?
Yeah.
Because if props is undefined, it's completely undeclared at all, I can't go and grab some property from it, right?
Right.
So let's verify that. If we save this guy here, uh-oh, props is not defined, and then if I go back to my application, it's growling at me. So there you go. Cool. All right, so just make sure, this is sort of like a little bit of a warning here. Sometimes you have to ensure that you have access to something inside of a function. If you don't, you'll run into those types of errors, and now you'll know why. It's because that thing's not defined. Okay, cool. So today what I want to introduce you guys to is a different React hook. And this hook is going to be called useEffect. What the useEffect hook is for when we want to cause some type of side effects inside of our application. Okay? Generally, what we're going to be using this hook for in our class is we're going to be using it as a place where we can go and make some kind of an API call and get some data for our application. Okay? All right. And then just as a quick side note, remember how we were doing some class components a day or two ago? Remember how we talked about lifecycle methods yesterday? There is a lifecycle method inside class components that you can use to make your API calls. I just want to let you guys know it's called component did mount. Okay? We're not really going to use it here because we're generally going to be using functional components. But if you were using a class component, you could do kind of your initial data getting in that component did mount. All right. So let's check out and see how this useEffect works. So if I come up here and I want to import that as well, I'll just add it to this. Okay? And then inside here, I'm going to actually call this function. So I'm going to say useEffect. Okay? And now we have to know, what do we need to pass useEffect? Well, useEffect takes a callback function. Okay? Hopefully we're kind of getting used to passing in callback functions to things. So if I want to, I can just create a little arrow function right inside here, like an inline arrow function. And I could just say console.log useEffect was called. Okay? So in other words, every time my code gets run by React, it's going to run this useEffect function, right? Because whenever this function is called, we have to go through all this stuff line by line. Does that make sense to you guys? All right. So let's test and see if that's working as we expect. If we go back here and we open up our console log, and yeah, so it already did it one time, but what I wanted to do is I wanted to generate a number a few times here. Notice that useEffect is getting called every single time. You see? So every time the state of my component changes, it needs to rerun through all of that code, which means that it's going to rerun that useEffect function. Okay?
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
What's the difference between useEffect and just putting a regular function on buttons every time you run the code? Like, what's so special about useEffect?
We'll see in a few minutes. Yeah, that's a good question, though. So what useEffect is going to give us is it's going to give us the ability to do something only one time. Remember how I talked about the other class component could have a component did mount lifecycle method? We can sort of mimic that using this useEffect function by saying, I only want useEffect to run when specific variables are changed. So let's do a little test of this. If I add as a second argument to the useEffect function an array, and inside that array, I can say I only want this to run when my items changes. Okay? Let's see what happens. So let's go back to our application here. If I generate a number, it's being called every single time, right? Why is that? Because items is changing every time I click on the button. So that's good. That's what I'm expecting. What if I just pass in an empty array?
But it did run when you load the page too.
Mm-hmm. It's always gonna run in the beginning as well. Yeah. So remember, useEffect is gonna run at least it will run at the very beginning, but we can potentially stop it from running after that, and that's what we're gonna use it for. Okay. So if I instead wanted to only run it one time, I can remove this and make this an empty array, basically telling React, yeah, go ahead and run useEffect the first time around, but after that, I don't want you to do anything.
So if you remove the items, then you
Then I could do what again? Say that again.
If you remove items,
Mhm.
just leave an empty array.
Yeah.
And then go back, something around every time you click.
Right, so now the only time it should run is going to be in the beginning. So let's test that out. So let's generate number. See, our callback function was only being run that very first time. Okay? This is why this is going to come in handy for us making API requests, because we only want to make that request generally right when we load up the component, right? For whatever data I needed to go get. All right. So what we're going to do, just to kind of like test and see how this works, is I'm going to make a fake API request, okay? We're not even going to like interact with any outside services right now. We're just going to pretend like we're doing that. Okay, so inside of our useEffect, I'm going to create something called I'm going to invoke a function called setTimeout. Have you guys seen that or heard of this before? So what setTimeout does is it allows us to run some function after a certain amount of time. Okay? And I'm going to use that to basically pretend like we're interacting with some outside service. Because if I go and make a request to an outside service, do I know how long it's going to take me to get that data back? I'm not really sure, right? Could be anything. Actually, let me get out of this component, and we're going to do this somewhere else. I just remembered I didn't want to do this here, but I was just showing you guys because we already had that component. Let's create a new component, and let's call it product. Okay, so inside my product, I'm going to import React. I'm also going to import useEffect because we know we need that, and useState, right? All right, and then I'm going to export a default function. We're going to say right now it doesn't really take anything in. We could change that later on, whatever. So let's use some state, right? Let's say I'm going to get back a product. So I'm going to get back a product and set product. Use state. What do I want the product to be initially? Maybe null, right? We'll just say I don't have the product yet. I need to go reach out and grab it from somewhere. Null. Okay. And then I'm going to call this useEffect hook. And then we're going to pass in this callback function. So what the callback function is going to do, and don't let me forget too to put this empty array here. The reason why I'm doing that again is because I only want this to run when the component first loads. Okay. So inside here, this is where I'm going to use setTimeout. I'm going to say setTimeout. And then setTimeout is going to take in, as you guys can see here, a callback function. And then it's also going to take in some number of milliseconds that I want this thing to run after. Okay? So we'll say our function is just going to be some anonymous arrow function, and I'm going to return an object that has some different product attributes. So let's say we've got a title for the product. This is my product. Brand, Sony. I don't know why. And then finally, the second argument that we want to provide is how long do we want this to take? Maybe a second. Does that make sense for you guys? Yeah, we'll specify 1,000 milliseconds.
So it's like a delay.
Yeah, it's like a delay. Okay. So if I'm returning this out, is that quite what I want to do though? Or do I want to actually invoke setProduct? I want to invoke that setProduct so I can update what product is. So I'm going to say setProduct over here. Okay. And now I should be good to go. Now I can get to the return part where we're actually specifying what do we want our components to look like. So I can say return maybe we'll have a div inside here, and then inside here, actually, hold on one second. Let's just do a little if kind of logic here. So if my product is null, what does that mean?
You have none.
That means that my API request hasn't come back yet, right? So let's just do a little check here. So if product equals null, then what I want to return is just a div that says loading. Oops. Okay. Now, if that's not true, if product's not null anymore, I can actually come down here and render out some information about the product. Does that make sense for you guys? All right, cool. So let's come down here, and then let's just do an h2 tag, and then we'll render out the product.title. And then down here, we'll have maybe an h3 tag where we say product.brand. Okay. Now what I want to do is I actually need to import this guy into my app, right? So let's come up here. We'll say import product from components product. Now I want to use this down here somewhere, maybe after my counter. And actually, I'm going to just comment these guys out so that we don't even see them. Okay, so I guess I need to comment out these imports too. Okay, so you guys can kind of see what was happening here, but I want to refresh the page so that we can see what happened. So if I do a hard reload here, you see how we got loading for about a second, and then we got our actual product data? So we're kind of faking reaching out and grabbing this from some outside service with set timeout. You guys obviously won't be using set timeout when we're making calls to our own APIs, but it's just to show you that we won't have that data right away when the component loads. Any questions about what we did here inside product? Dead silence.
Everyone gets it or no one gets it?
Yeah, you know, sometimes it feels that way. It's either like just, yeah, either great or not so great. All right, before we do context, let's have some thumbs on this. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Some sideways, some sideways. All right, Isaiah, you're a man for clarifications. What do you got?
Oh, honestly, man, it's just for like just fatigue. Honestly speaking, that's really why it's hard for me to believe the channel.
Okay, all right.
But it's actually just
Okay. All right, fair enough. So yeah, the big thing I want you guys, excuse me, to take away from this is that we're going to be using this useEffect hook in general to be getting data for any component that needs its data. Okay. We won't be doing it in this exact way with set timeout. However, it is the hook that we'll be using, for that purpose. Okay. One other thing I wanted to show you guys today is this thing called the Context API. And what the Context API allows us to do is it allows us to not keep sending props down through our component tree. Okay? Now, so far, we've only had to deal with kind of one level. So this hasn't really been much of a problem. But what if I had a whole bunch of different levels in my component tree, and I wanted some inner level to have access to something that an outer level has? You could.
So that would
Go ahead.
be more like session, right? Than props. Oh, sorry.
Well, let's think about a scenario in which we may want to do this. Let's say we were building a shopping cart application, okay? and I had a shopping cart, yeah, it is kind of similar to session, right? I want to be able to go to some different quote pages in my application and still see what's in my shopping cart. So if we wanted to do that, we might want to have some state that was kind of on the outer levels of our application, but the inner levels would still need to have some access to that. React has this thing called a context API that we can use just for that purpose. Okay? So let's see about how we can actually use this thing called the context API. I'm going to create inside my source folder another folder called contexts. I meant to do that in the plural. Okay, and then we're going to have a context in here. So I'm just going to create like a shopping cart context. Okay, and then inside there, what I need to import is going to be this function called create context. Create context from React.
So we don't need to import React?
No, and the reason why I don't have to import React is because I'm not actually going to be rendering any JSX from this file. Okay, I'm just going to actually be calling this function. That's about it. I'm just going to say export default, create context, and I'm going to invoke that function. Okay, so that's going to create a context that I'll be able to use somewhere in my application. Now, in my app.js, for instance, I can import this context. So let's do that. Import shopping cart from contexts shopping cart. All right. And if I want my application to have some access to this thing, what I want to do is I want to wrap all of the components that are going to need to have access to it in what's called a provider component. Okay? The provider component is the thing that's going to give all of these values to the subcomponents. So I'm going to say, instead of these empty fragment tags here, I'm going to say shopping cart dot provider. And then I need to end it the same way, right? Now what the provider is going to take is it's going to take a value property. The value property is the thing that I'm going to be able to access from my subcomponents. Okay? So let's just say the value here equals, it's going to be a JavaScript expression, so I need these curly braces, and then I'm just going to create, I don't know, a shopping cart inside here, right? So my cart's going to have some different items. What items do we want to have? Products, is that what you said?
Yeah.
Yeah, so right now I'm in an individual product. What do we want this to be called?
Well, title and brand. Title, brand, price.
Yeah, no, but tell me a title of something. I'm trying to create an actual product here.
I think she said toothpaste back there.
Toothpaste? There you go. All right. What's the brand on that?
Charcoal.
What'd you say? Charcoal hippie? Is that it? Is that is that an actual brand? Nice. That's gonna be your new company, right? All right. Yeah, and then we'll have a price. What is it, like $15?
That's too cheap.
It's got to be expensive,
Like
right?
35.
$35. Quantity, right? Yeah, that's all we can afford, right? All right, cool. So we've got this shopping cart that has a single item in it. Now, what I want to be able to do is somewhere deeper in my component tree, I want to be able to actually use that value. Okay? And to demonstrate the usefulness of this, I'm actually going to create a fairly useless component. It's just going to be a wrapper. That's it. Okay?
A wrapper.
A wrapper, yeah. So check this out. Let's create this wrapper component.
A little easy. For Kanye West, 'cause that's a useless wrapper.
Oh man, that's
Spit in truth.
okay. So again, this thing is going to be really useless. I'm just going to say export default, some function here. And what the function is going to return is just going to be a div that has whatever the children is. Okay? Now keep in mind, I don't want you guys to actually like do this exact thing in your projects. This is simply to indicate to you why context is going to be useful. There's no need to create, empty wrapper components. And I apologize in advance for sort of showing you something like a quote bad practice or whatever. But we'll kind of see why this makes sense in a little bit. So all I'm creating is just something that's going to render out its children, right? That's it. If I come into my app component here and I use this wrapper a few times, so let's import it.
You can export.
I didn't? I did.
Yeah, export default.
Yeah. Yeah, so before I was doing things separate, now I'm kind of doing them all together. That's up to you. Just make sure that you are in fact exporting from the file. Okay. So back in our app, let's import it. Oops. Components wrapper. Okay, and then I'm going to have one other thing. I'm going to have like a small component here that I create just called mini cart. A mini cart icon, yeah, exactly. So let's import React, and I'm going to import another hook called useContext. Okay, we'll export a function here, an anonymous function. Now, what I want this mini cart to do is have access to whatever's in my shopping cart so that I can display it out. That would be nice, right? Okay, so what I can do is I can invoke this useContext hook to actually pull out all of my shopping cart values. So I can say const cart. I'll just call it, we'll call it cart items because it was just an array, right? Equals useContext. Now when I invoke the useContext function, I need to have the context that I'm using. You guys remember what context I created? I created a shopping cart context, right? So I can say import shopping cart from, I have to go out one level into my contexts and then shopping cart. Okay? And then I need to pass in that shopping cart context here. All right? Now that I have my cart items, what do I want to do with them? I probably just want to like map through them, right? Okay. So I'm going to say return cart items dot map. And then inside that mapping function, I'm going to have an individual item and an index that I can use. Okay, and then for each one of those, all I want to have is maybe a div tag that has some different things about it. So I've got title, right? We'll do that inside of a p tag. So to do, oh, I hate when it does that. Does that happen to any of you guys? Really weird. All right, so I want the item title. I also want the item's brand, right? Actually, let me just copy this down because I'm feeling super lazy. Brand. And then same thing here. Let's just copy that down and do the price, right? Okay. cool. Now inside my app, I want to place my mini cart kind of deep inside of some wrappers. All right? Not Little Wheezy or whatever you guys are saying. Whatever it was. I don't know. Kanye West is what he said. All right, let's just do wrappers on wrappers, right? Divs on divs. Okay, and then I want to actually import this mini cart because I want to use that as well. Oops. From components mini cart. Okay, so inside here, let's just drop this mini cart. Now I want you guys to notice, did I pass any props to the mini cart? No, so how's it going to get its values? From that context, from this provider right here. The provider is going to give it the context that it needs to actually grab my shopping cart items. Let's save this guy. I think everything else was saved, right? Okay. Come back over here. And I've got my little mini shopping cart. Maybe I should put something else in there so it's a little more clear that's what that is. So instead of just returning this out, let's go. Yeah. Okay. Okay, so I now have to wrap this in curly braces because it's some kind of a JavaScript expression, right? The other thing that I need to do is I want to just put up in here, I don't know, H1 shopping cart. Okay. Does anybody know what's wrong here?
Why did it get? Oh, because you have to wrap your H1.
Because every component needs to have some master wrapper around it. Okay. So if I didn't want to add any HTML to my page, I could wrap it with these little empty fragment tags. Whoops. Like that, and then I would take this. Oh, I put that in the wrong place. Hold on, let me just move that up by 1. Move this guy there. Okay, so now it should be a little bit more clear that we do in fact have our shopping cart. I know the styling is looking pretty awesome here. Right?
Out of curiosity, the empty element wrapping element adding, is that more in line of this annotation for the exact sense that there is no wrapping element around it, or they actually try to
So yeah, those little empty fragment tags are just saying I don't want to put an actual HTML tag here. Because sometimes our HTML gets pretty heavy with lots of divs,
right.
div nesting, and I'm just trying to avoid that.
Okay, so it's an actual.
I could actually put a div tag around there if I wanted to.
Okay.
Yeah, so that'd be fine. Questions? Yes.
Does it have to be a div tag? Can you put it in like, whether like a paragraph tag?
Yeah, I could put it in a p tag.
Okay.
Sure. Yep. Yes.
The main idea about the context is this something similar to you have a database and you have a API that only returns JSON object, so you can like call it basically anywhere in your basically website and get access to that without.
I don't know that I would say that the state of our application is so much like a database, although, you know, if that analogy works for you, then it could be okay. But, well, yeah, but what the context is generally going to be useful for is having some state that sort of follows us, you know, from component to component. If it's something that's really only local to one component, there's really no reason to be using context at all. But if I had like a user logged into my application and I needed to know who that user was on every individual page, context may come in handy for something like that.
Wait a second.
Clear the session? Well, how am I going to do that? Because if you notice in my app.js, did I give any way of actually altering this? No. And we could do that. However, we've already been talking for pretty long right now, so I'm not going to do it right now. But what we could do is we could also provide inside this value some kind of function that would allow us to update this state, right?
Right.
All the callback function.
Yeah, exactly. It would be a callback function. So if I want to set the items in my cart, I could create a function that would do that.
Right.
So in that case, my cart would need to have some state associated with it. Right now it doesn't. Right now it's just like totally static. The cart is as it is, and I can't touch it. Not so useful, but I just wanted to show you guys how the context API works initially. And you can see like I've wrapped some stuff here and I didn't pass down any props. It really just allows me to go grab something from up above somewhere without passing it down explicitly.
Gotcha.
Okay? All right. Any other questions? No? All right. Thank you guys. Off to work.